The sound of grinding turf woke me up before sunrise. Again. I bolted out of bed, pulled on a hoodie, and stormed to the front porch just in time to see that ridiculous hot pink golf cart zip across my lawn like it was some kind of amusement park ride. My grass, freshly reseeded just last month, was torn up in deep tire ruts. And behind the wheel, like always, was Patricia Zeller, head of the HOA and the self-declared queen of Willow Creek estates. She didn't even glance my way. I stood there, barefoot on my own porch, watching the woman vanish down the street like she hadn't just vandalized my property. Again, I'm Camden Jarrett. I'm an ER nurse, I work nights, and the last thing I ever wanted was to pick a fight with anyone, let alone the HOA. But Patricia had a talent for dragging people into the mud. And she never used the golf cart for anything but her daily tyrant rounds, harassing people about mailbox height, or whether their grass was too aggressively green. And for the past 3 weeks, she'd been cutting across my lawn like it was her personal shortcut to the clubhouse. I'd already filed 2 complaints. She ignored both. The HOA board, her little army of yes-men, claimed they couldn't verify the incident. I even installed a motion sensor camera on my porch. But every time I brought it up during the monthly meetings, Patricia would laugh in that shrill, condescending way and say, "Camden, honestly, you should be thanking me. I'm exposing flaws in your landscaping." Yeah, she said that, so I decided to handle it myself, not with violence. I'm not that guy. I'm a nurse. Saving lives is kind of my thing, but I know how to make a problem go away without breaking the law. I ordered spike strips. The kind used by off-roaders to keep trespassers out of remote properties, totally legal on private land. I buried them just beneath the grass at the spot where Patricia always cut through the same curve between my driveway and the sidewalk, where she liked to swing wide with her stupid golf cart. I added a small private property, "Do not enter" sign near the edge, just enough to make it legal. Then I waited. The next morning it was like clockwork. Her cart came humming down the street, hot pink with white trim, speakers blaring some swing jazz nonsense like she was Gatsby's ghost. I watched through my living room window, sipping coffee. She never saw it coming. There was a loud pop, 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 followed by a high-pitched screech and a long, satisfying thud. Patricia's golf cart lurched sideways, then tipped slowly onto its side like a beached whale. I ran outside, camera already rolling. "Patricia," I yelled, feigning concern. "Are you okay?" She was sitting up in the grass, stunned, her visor crooked and her hair frizzed out like a science experiment. The cart was totaled, 2 tires completely shredded, the undercarriage dented, and a big pink scrape carved right across my turf. "What did you do?" she screeched. Her voice hit glass-shattering pitch. "I protected my property," I said, holding up my phone, still recording. "You've been warned multiple times. You ignored every notice. Now you owe me for turf damage, and you owe yourself a new golf cart." She scrambled up and pointed a trembling finger at me. "This is an act of aggression. You've endangered a board member. You broke the law, Patricia," I said. "And I've got 3 weeks' worth of security footage, timestamps, and the HOA's own refusal to act. You've got a real problem on your hands." She stomped up to me, red-faced and seething. "You're going to regret this, Camden Jarrett. The HOA will fine you so hard your grandkids will feel it," I laughed. "Oh, I'm counting on it. Try me." That afternoon, I received a citation in my mailbox. Unauthorized lawn alterations. Improper signage. Intentional sabotage of HOA official property. Patricia had clearly wasted no time rallying her cronies, but what she didn't know was that I'd already spoken to a property attorney. Turns out, the HOA's own bylaws state that board members must avoid conflicts of interest, can't use private property for personal travel, and must respond to formal complaints within 72 hours, which they hadn't. I had timestamps, emails, video, a full paper trail. And I wasn't the only one she'd crossed. The next evening, I hosted a barbecue. Nothing huge, just a few neighbors I'd gotten to know over the years. Turns out, Patricia had been riding rough over others, too. Carla down the street had her flower beds trampled by Patricia's cart during a routine inspection. Marcus had been fined for a fence that Patricia's own dog had chewed through. We started comparing notes. Old school paper binders came out. People had receipts, letters, even audio recordings from board meetings where Patricia admitted to bending rules for the good of the neighborhood. By the end of the night, the HOA's golden girl was starting to look a lot more like a liability than a leader. But the real cherry on top came the next morning when I walked out to my mailbox and found a second citation, this one for public endangerment through anti-vehicle devices. Hand-delivered. No envelope. I turned it over. The signature was scrawled in thick blue ink, Patricia Zeller. She'd bypassed the board and written it herself. That was her mistake. I took the citation, stapled it to a copy of the HOA bylaws, and circled the section about unauthorized personal enforcement. Then I made 50 copies, one for every household in Willow Creek. I dropped them off door to door before noon. By sunset, I had 17 emails, 6 voicemails, and 3 people knocking on my door asking how they could help. The war was on. A week after the barbecue, Willow Creek was buzzing like a hornet's nest. I'd never seen so many neighbors on the sidewalks, heads together in hushed conversations, phones out, folders passed hand to hand. Patricia had ruled this place like a dictator in pastel slacks for years, but now the illusion of her invincibility had cracked, and people were stepping into the light. I didn't start this war, but I wasn't going to let it end with a whimper. The morning after I distributed the bylaws with Patricia's unauthorized citation attached, a manila envelope showed up on my doorstep with no return address. Inside was a printed spreadsheet, columns of names, dates, amounts, and brief notes. Mailbox paint violation, unapproved garden gnome, seasonal lighting fine. Tens of thousands of dollars in HOA citations, all issued under Patricia's leadership. Most of them were marked paid, but a few had notes like contested, never resolved, or worse, no record of payment received despite check cleared. That's when it hit me. Patricia hadn't just been power tripping, she'd been skimming. I called Marcus, a neighbor who worked in municipal records. When I explained what I had, he offered to swing by. He showed up with a laptop, a scanner, and a notepad full of HOA financial filings he'd pulled from the county clerk's office. And just like that, we started connecting the dots. The HOA's official accounting showed annual expenses that didn't match the fines collected, thousands of dollars unaccounted for, and payments marked as applied that residents had proof were never received. "This is embezzlement," Marcus muttered, eyes scanning the spreadsheet. If this were a city office, she'd already be in handcuffs. I didn't say anything. I just reached for my phone and dialed. Detective Louis Sandoval from the county's Economic Crimes Division met with us 2 days later. He was quiet, methodical, and didn't bother with small talk. He asked for every document we had, every video file, every screenshot of the HOA portal. I handed over a flash drive and Marcus uploaded the rest from his laptop. "This'll take some time," the detective said, tucking the evidence into a leather case. "But if even half of this checks out, you're looking at felony-level misappropriation of funds. Keep your heads down. Don't tell her we're involved yet." That same afternoon, I got a visit from someone I hadn't expected, Arlene Torres, one of the longest-standing residents in Willow Creek. She was in her 70s, barely 5 feet tall, and carried herself like someone who'd marched in protests before the rest of us were even born. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "I used to be treasurer," she said, stepping into my living room without waiting for permission. "Back when this place still had integrity. Patricia pushed me out 3 years ago, said I was too stuck in old ways. I offered her coffee. She waved it off. She started making changes without votes. Bylaws were written at night. Board meetings moved to weekdays during work hours. Then came the fines. I kept records, every last one, got tired of keeping quiet. She handed me a worn leather binder filled with handwritten notes, photocopies of checks, and letters from residents dating back 5 years. I flipped through them, my stomach tightening. "How did she get away with this for so long?" I asked. Arlene gave a humorless chuckle. "Fear and apathy, but mostly fear. She threatened people with liens, said she'd have their homes auctioned, and she had just enough people on the board to make it seem legal." I studied her face. "You ever think about running again?" She raised an eyebrow. "You offering me a campaign manager?" I smiled for the first time that day. "I'm offering you a front row seat to a reckoning." The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday night in the clubhouse. Normally, maybe 10 people showed up. This time, over 60 residents packed the room. Some were standing. All watched Patricia as she entered, wearing a lavender cardigan and a smug expression that faded the moment she saw the turnout. She cleared her throat and launched into her usual preamble. "Welcome, everyone. I see we have quite the crowd tonight. I hope this isn't another attempt to undermine the board." "Actually," I said, standing, "we're here to hold the board accountable." Murmurs rippled through the room. Patricia narrowed her eyes. "Camden, if this is about your little prank with the golf cart, it's not," I said. "It's about the $37,000 in unaccounted fines you've collected over the past 4 years. It's about the forged citations, the unauthorized rule changes, and the fact that you've been using HOA funds to cover personal expenses, including repairs to your golf cart." Gasps. One woman dropped her pen. Patricia's face went pale. "That's a serious accusation." "Agreed," I said. "Which is why I've handed everything over to the county, including scanned checks from residents that never showed in the HOA ledger. And guess what? The detective assigned to the case confirmed the account numbers don't match." She sputtered. "You went to the police." "Several of us did," Marcus said from the back. "And until the investigation concludes, we're calling for a temporary suspension of the current board's authority, including yours." "You don't have that power," Arlene stepped up beside me. "Actually, we do. Section 9, Paragraph 5 of the original bylaws, still legally binding due to lack of a recorded amendment, allows for board suspension by 2/3 vote of attending members." Patricia looked around, expecting support. Her cronies on the board froze like deer in headlights. No one came to her defense. "Raise your hands if you support a temporary suspension and independent audit," I said, hands shot up. Nearly everyone. Patricia stood frozen as the realization set in. "You can't, you brought this on yourself," Arlene said, voice calm but firm. "You forgot something important. This neighborhood isn't yours, it's ours." By the time the meeting adjourned, Patricia had stormed out. Her pink golf cart was still parked outside, a cracked windshield and mismatched tires evidence of her collision with karma. People lingered in the parking lot, shaking hands, laughing, trading stories. The tension that had gripped Willow Creek for years was dissolving, replaced with something stronger: solidarity. The next morning, a moving van arrived outside Patricia's house. Curtains twitched across the neighborhood. She didn't even look up as she loaded boxes into the back. No farewell, no apology. 2 weeks later, Detective Sandoval confirmed what we already knew. Patricia had diverted nearly $50,000 in HOA funds into a personal account under a shell LLC. Charges were filed. Her name hit the county blotter, but the best part: the HOA board, now under interim leadership, voted to return all improperly collected fines. Residents received checks in the mail. Some cried, others cheered. A few threw small porch parties to celebrate the downfall of the Queen. As for me, I reseeded my lawn. Again. But this time, neighbors offered to help. Marcus brought over a sprinkler head. Carla contributed flower bulbs. Kids from 2 houses down helped roll the sod, and one evening, Arlene stopped by with 2 folding chairs and a bottle of iced tea. "You know," she said, settling beside me, "I always thought it would take a lawyer to bring her down. Turns out it just took a nurse with a camera and a spine." I raised my glass. "To turf wars and justice." She clinked hers against mine. "And no more damn golf carts." By mid-October, Willow Creek had changed. Block by block, the neighborhood was coming alive again, not with noise or parties, but with quiet collaboration. Lawn chairs appeared on front porches. People waved longer, talked more. For the first time in years, residents were organizing without fear of fines or retaliatory letters disguised as courtesy notices. But beneath the surface, things were getting serious. The county's investigation into Patricia had triggered something unexpected. While they were combing through the HOA's books, they stumbled on a second set of documents. At first glance, they looked like duplicates until the forensic accountant assigned to the case noticed certain numbers didn't match. Names had been altered. Payment dates shifted subtly. And one file, marked Archive Private, had a spreadsheet labeled Asset Recovery Initiative. I got the call from Detective Sandoval while I was changing out of my scrubs in the ER locker room. She wasn't just skimming, he said. She was staging foreclosures. I froze with one shoe half on. Staging them how? Selective enforcement, fabricated violations, inflated late fees, then pressuring people to sell before official action was taken. We found 6 homes transferred under market value to a shell company, all within the last 2 years. I sat down hard on the bench. Who owns the shell? Working on it. But the LLC's registered agent is a man named Alan Zeller. Her husband, brother, doesn't live in the state. We're pulling his banking records. You might want to get your neighbors organized. This is going to get uglier. When I got home, I called an emergency meeting not in the clubhouse, obviously. We used Marcus's garage. By the time I arrived, he'd already set up 2 folding tables, a whiteboard, and a coffee machine. Carla brought her laptop. Arlene came in with a stack of labeled folders that looked like they hadn't seen daylight since the Bush administration. Marcus looked up from a spreadsheet. They bled people out, Camden. Small fines that snowballed. One guy was charged for non-regulation mulch coloration. What does that even mean? Arlene dropped a folder on the table. It means someone wanted his house. Carla turned her screen to face us. I cross-checked the 6 properties. All were owned outright, no mortgages. All were sold under value to the same LLC, and guess what? Every single one was later flipped for a profit. Patricia ran a real estate racket under the HOA's nose. I leaned back against the garage wall. We're not dealing with petty corruption. This is organized theft. Marcus tapped the whiteboard. We need to find the previous owners. If we can get statements, we can prove coercion. Arlene didn't hesitate. I kept contact info. Some left the state, but they all kept in touch. When you lose your home to a con, you don't forget. Over the next week, we tracked down 4 of the 6 former residents. One lived with his daughter in Arizona. Another had moved into an assisted living facility. They all told the same story. Escalating fines, ignored appeals, and sudden pressure to sell. Not one of them knew the buyer was connected to Patricia, but it was the 5th homeowner who blew the whole thing open. Her name was Denise Holloway. She was in her early 60s, and when I called her, she hesitated until I mentioned I was from Willow Creek. She agreed to meet at a diner just outside town. She walked in with a manila envelope tucked under her arm and a tremor in her hand. They told me if I didn't sell, they'd put a lien on the house, she said, unfolding a faded letter. Said they'd auction it. I was recovering from chemo. I didn't have the strength to fight. She handed me the envelope. Inside were photos, scanned letters, bank receipts, and one audio file burned to a CD labeled HOA Call May. I played it that night in Marcus's garage. The voice was unmistakable. Patricia, you're already 2 months behind on landscaping compliance. I'm just trying to help you avoid further penalties. A quick sale would be the most. Dignified solution, Denise. The voice on the other end cracked. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just need time. You've had time. We can't allow one homeowner to hold the community back. Sign the offer and we'll waive the outstanding fines. It was blackmail. Sandoval didn't need convincing. He picked up the evidence personally. Within 48 hours, a warrant was issued for Patricia's arrest. She was taken into custody at a golf resort 2 counties over, wearing a tennis visor and shrieking about misunderstandings. The arrest made the local paper. Then the regional news. By the weekend, it had gone national, but the fallout wasn't limited to her. 3 of the remaining board members resigned the next day. One tried to claim ignorance. Another left town entirely. Only one, a quiet guy named Ben who'd always looked vaguely uncomfortable at meetings, agreed to stay on as interim secretary under Arlene's watchful eye. The county froze the HOA's accounts. An independent trustee was appointed. Residents were told to stop making payments until the books were reconciled. And then the real reckoning began. I was sitting on my porch one evening, nursing a bruised rib from a combative ER patient, when a man I didn't recognize walked up the driveway. He was in his 40s, clean-cut, and carried himself like someone used to courtrooms. "My name's Daniel Kessler," he said. "I'm with the state attorney's office. We're filing a civil suit to recover the stolen assets. I understand you've been coordinating with residents." I nodded cautiously. We've been compiling evidence. That evidence just turned into a class action. If you're willing, we'd like you to serve as community liaison. I didn't answer right away. He waited. You're going after the LLC too? I asked. Every shell, every account, every signature. We've already traced transfers to 2 other states. This wasn't a one-woman operation. We believe this was a network, and Willow Creek is just the start. The next few weeks were a whirlwind: depositions, media inquiries, attorneys calling at all hours. I found myself juggling ER shifts with strategy meetings and court briefings. It was exhausting, but it felt right. One afternoon, I stopped by Carla's house to deliver some paperwork. Her teenage son was stringing lights across their porch. "You know," she said, watching him from the doorway, "we almost moved, last year. Got tired of the threats, the stress, but now, I think we'll stay." The lawsuit gained traction fast. With Denise's recording and the financial records Arlene had preserved, the case was airtight. Civil charges for fraud, coercion, and wire transfer violations stacked up. Criminal charges followed. Patricia's brother, Alan, was extradited from Nevada. Turns out the guy hadn't even stepped foot in Willow Creek. He'd just signed whatever she sent him. By the time winter rolled in, the court ordered restitution. Every homeowner who'd been improperly fined or coerced was compensated plus damages. The LLC's assets were liquidated. The golf cart sold at auction, proceeds distributed, and Willow Creek, we rewrote the bylaws. No more unchecked authority. No more closed-door meetings. The board was reshaped with transparency rules, term limits, and quarterly audits. The clubhouse, once a symbol of control, became a true community center again. Potlucks, game nights, even a book club. One evening, I walked past the spot where Patricia's cart had flipped. The grass had fully grown back, greener than ever. A few kids were playing tag nearby, their laughter echoing down the street. Arlene joined me on the sidewalk. "Didn't think I'd live to see the day," she said, hands in her jacket pockets. "Me neither." "You're a good man, Camden." I shook my head. "I just wanted my lawn back," she smiled. Funny how things start, and just like that, peace finally returned to Willow Creek. Not because someone enforced it, but because the people had taken it back. Together. Snow came early that year, covering Willow Creek in a soft hush that made the whole neighborhood feel different. Not just quiet, but cleansed. The kind of silence that follows a storm when the wreckage is cleared and people start laying bricks again. Beneath the frost-covered roofs and neatly shoveled driveways, something stronger than peace was settling in. Control, wrested back by the people who lived here. I'd spent the last few weeks helping organize the neighborhood's first ever open forum for external oversight, not the HOA's idea. Ours. We'd invited a representative from the county's housing commission, a consumer protection lawyer, and even a journalist who had covered the Patricia case in the Sunday investigative column. The room was packed again, but this time, the energy was different. People were engaged, not afraid. Curious, not defensive, after the meeting I stayed behind to help stack chairs. I wasn't in a rush. For once, I didn't feel like I had to be anywhere else. "You hear about the new development going in outside the east fence?" Marcus asked, leaning on the last chair he folded. "Yeah," I said. "The one with the splash park and the solar roofs," he nodded. "They offered Arlene a consulting role, said they wanted someone who knew what a real community needs." I blinked. "That's smart," he grinned. "They're learning." As we walked out, the wind picked up, and a flurry of snow danced across the pavement. I pulled my jacket tighter and glanced down the street, past the rows of glowing porch lights and wreath-covered doors, to the lot where Patricia's house used to be. After the court seized it, the structure was condemned and torn down. The foundation had been filled in, and now it was just an empty patch of powdery white. Someone had stuck a pine sapling in the middle, no sign. No plaque, just a living thing where something rotten had once stood. But just as the neighborhood was finding its rhythm again, a letter arrived at my door. Not folded, no stamp, just slid into the mailbox by hand and sealed with a strip of red tape. I opened it at my kitchen counter, the faint smell of cologne wafting up from the paper. Inside was a single line. "You may have won, but you don't know the whole game." There was no signature. I stared at it for a long time before calling Detective Sandoval. He answered on the second ring. "I think someone's trying to warn me," I said. "He asked me to bring it in." When I arrived, he had a digital forensics tech scan the note. The paper was commercial grade, the kind used in law offices or real estate firms. The handwriting was traced back to a former paralegal who had worked for one of Patricia's attorneys during the asset seizures. Sandoval went silent when he heard the name. Her legal team had connections to a firm under investigation for predatory development, he said. They've been circling neighborhoods like this one for years, waiting for the HOA to collapse so they can swoop in, buy cheap, and flip fast. So this wasn't just about her golf cart and embezzlement, he shook his head. That was the surface. Beneath it, she was part of something bigger. She didn't invent the scheme, she was their entry point. The paralegal was brought in for questioning. Under pressure, he admitted that Patricia had been recruited after a property management seminar in Boulder 5 years ago. She was offered incentives to streamline the neighborhood's administration. In exchange, she granted exclusive property rights to companies operating under different names, all tied back to a single holding firm registered overseas. The firm had already bought up properties in 3 nearby towns, using the same tactics: elect a cooperative HOA president, inflate fines, push out vulnerable homeowners, and quietly sell the lots to shell buyers. In each case, the neighborhoods were gutted and rebuilt as high-profit rental zones. Willow Creek had been next. Sandoval brought in the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I was asked to testify about the letter and the patterns we'd uncovered. Every document we had, every recording, every scan check was submitted into evidence. What had started as a local turf dispute had officially crossed state lines and international borders. The Department of Justice opened a racketeering investigation. It took months, but the dominoes fell. The holding firm's assets were frozen. Executives were subpoenaed. Several of Patricia's former board members were indicted for conspiracy to commit housing fraud. One of them had been managing the transfer documents for the LLC under a fake name. Another had received kickbacks in the form of untraceable prepaid debit cards. The paralegal who delivered the letter was placed under witness protection. He gave up the name of the recruiter, the man who had originally approached Patricia. His name was Vincent Ralston, former executive at a real estate conglomerate that had been fined in the past for manipulating zoning laws. He was arrested at a luxury condo in Miami. With the entire scheme exposed, the courts ordered a restitution fund to be established using seized assets from the shell companies. Willow Creek was granted priority status. Every coerced homeowner was offered their property back, fully paid for. 3 families returned. Others took the payout and used it to rebuild elsewhere, but at least now they had the choice. A state senator even introduced legislation named after one of the former residents, the Holloway Act. It prohibited HOAs from issuing fines without third-party oversight and required all board meetings to be recorded and made publicly available. It passed unanimously. The neighborhood held a vote to dissolve the original HOA entirely. In its place, we formed a neighborhood council, voluntary, transparent, and advisory only. Arlene served as chair, Marcus as zoning liaison, and Carla as financial secretary. I declined a formal role, but they still dragged me into every project. One morning in early spring, I was planting dogwood trees along the old east fence line when a moving truck rumbled up the street. A couple in their 30s stepped out, surveying the neighborhood with cautious optimism. They introduced themselves as Thomas and Layla, teachers from out of state. "We heard this neighborhood went through some stuff," Layla said carefully. Marcus, who was helping me with the mulch, chuckled. "You could say that." Thomas looked toward the empty lot where Patricia's house once stood and asked what had happened there. I wiped my hands on my jeans and said, "That's where we buried the worst of it." He smiled, not understanding the full weight of it yet, but he would. Later that week, I walked past the pine sapling again. It had grown nearly a foot since winter. Someone had tied a small blue ribbon around its trunk. No note, no explanation, just a quiet promise. I stopped to look at it, then kept walking. There would always be people who tried to twist power into profit. But there would also be people like Arlene, Marcus, Carla, and reluctantly me who stood up and said, "Not here." We didn't just win back our lawns. We reclaimed our homes, our choices, and our voices. And no one, not a tyrant with a golf cart, not a shadowy LLC, not a single crooked signature was ever going to take that from us again.